Michelle, thank you so much for taking the time this morning to share with our audience today on preventing dating abuse and your story. We want to hear your story.
Well, thank you, Kimberly. And thank you for joining us in our efforts to end domestic violence and provide tools for safe dating. As you know, I was involved in a violent relationship for 4 years. In those 4 years, I went through emotional abuse, financial manipulation, physical violence, and sexual violence. And I particularly remember the first time there was physical violence was 5 months into the relationship.
5 months. How traumatic. I can't even imagine. How do we look for those signs? What are the red flags, and where can we find those red flags?
Yeah, there's definitely red flags, and red flags that I actually didn't acknowledge or see when I was in that relationship. But if you go on to the National Network to End Domestic Violence, on their website they have a list of red flags. A couple of those red flags kind of stood out to me. One of them is isolation and that your spouse moves too quickly. So for me, Paul, my abuser, wanted me to move in with him like 4 or 5 months into our relationship. Way too fast. But he did not live in LA, so he was further north. So when I moved, he technically isolated me from all of my surroundings, isolated me from my friends, my congregation, my family. And then another red flag was that he started to control who I was allowed to hang out with, who I could see, who I couldn't see, where I was allowed to go. He would tell me that I had a friend, and I ended up going to have ice cream with her, but she was a colleague of his, and when I came back, he scolded me and told me that I couldn't hang out with her as a friend anymore, and that she was almost his property. So he started to control everybody in my life, friends, family, coworkers, which leads me to one of my next points, is he made me quit my job. So I remember we were having an argument in the car, and he said, well, you either have to quit or our relationship is going to end. So I thought he was my Prince Charming, so then I called my boss and quit just 5 hours before I was supposed to be to work. So another red flag is that he insults you. So in the beginning of our relationship, he was amazing. You know, he would tell me how beautiful I was and what I was doing was awesome, and that I could achieve anything that I wanted to achieve if I put my mind to it. But shortly after, did that turn into insults and criticism. And he would tell me how awful I was, how ugly, or how fat, or how I could never accomplish any of my dreams. Another thing is that he never took responsibility for his actions. So I remember one time when I was beat so severely that I was really bloodied, I had a black eye. The next morning he woke up and he was staring at me, and I was drifting in and out of sleep that night. And he started crying in the morning and saying how sorry he was and profusely apologizing. And as you know, there's a cycle in domestic violence, and it goes from walking on eggshells to there being a huge blow up, emotionally, sexually, or physically. And then the I love yous, the I'm sorries, the apology stage. And he was in that. And shortly after that fight, we went to dinner. And my eye stayed black for weeks, so I was wearing sunglasses. And I had ordered a glass of wine at dinner, and the gal asked me for my ID, so I gave it to her, and she kindly asked me to remove my sunglasses. I was hesitant, but I did, you know, and it astonished her. And she hesitantly handed me back my ID and went to get my glass of wine. And Paul was sitting across from me, and Paul said, well, it doesn't look that bad. He used to tell me how crazy his ex-girlfriend was. And he would blame his ex-girlfriend for the demise of their relationship. So make sure to watch out for that, because if they start blaming their exes, then that's a huge red flag. And he used to tell me how crazy she was, and later did I find out she was abused.
How can people avoid falling victim to some of these things, and so that we can really educate our audience on the safe dating resources.
So the number one thing that I recommend is that you do research on the person you're going out with. So say John asks you on a date, John Smith, okay? Go online and Google John Smith. Go on social media. It's 2017, 21st century. There's internet. There's credible sources where you can look people up. Go on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Find out what they're posting. Find out the type of person that they are. Ask people around you. Another one is that if you decide to go on a date, make sure you meet in a public place. Don't go to a secluded area where you could potentially be hurt. Another one is make sure you tell somebody where you're going. So say I tell you, Kimberly, that I'm going out on a date with John Smith, and I say I'm going to Paparazzi restaurant, okay? You know where I am. So if I don't come home, you know where to start looking for me, and you know where to tell the police to start looking for me. Another technique is pay attention to the way that he talks to the waiter or waitress or the people who are serving you. If he's rude, arrogant, pompous, thinks that he owns the world, like Paul did, it's definitely a red flag, and it's something that you should definitely look at to maybe not continue the relationship. And then have an end time for the date. So say you start the date at 7 and you tell your date that you want to end by midnight. Don't move your boundaries. Just make sure to end the date at midnight. And the last thing that I want to leave you and our viewers with is relationships are a partnership. It's a collaboration between two people. It's equality. Make sure that you're heard. Make sure that you're appreciated and respected. You know, 1 in 4 women and 1 in 11 men in the United States experience domestic violence in their lifetime.
Wow, that is a crazy statistic, and our goal is to shed off all domestic violence, especially in our youth. And I just want to thank you so much for today. It was so great seeing you again. I know you've got some great things in your future, and we're really excited that Mary Kay has the first text help ever line, and you can find that on the screen.